Before we begin, a quick word. If this channel can hit 5,000 subscribers by July, I will make a video talking about the Kingdom Keepers book series. So if you want to see that, make sure you're subscribed. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the video. Hello, and welcome back to Short Spotlight, the series where we talk about Disney animated shorts. Old and new, obscure and famous, big and small. I've got a question for you, and it's an important one to help us understand this series. Why do people make cartoon shorts? Someone could give you a wide variety of answers. They have a story that only needs a few minutes to be told. They prefer the shorter runtime because it's less intimidating. But there's one reason why many studios continue to make animated short films: to test new technology. In a medium like film, new techniques are discovered and being made all the time, and all of them have great potential to be used in a feature production. However, you're not going to want to implement those until you know how they work. Thus, why you make short films to test the water. So when you look back on the early years of animation, the animated short film's main purpose was to test new technology. Such is the case with today's subject, the Old Mill. I consider the Old Mill to be the epitome of the Disney Golden Age. Despite its length, it has the same quality of any of the animated films. And it's a good example of what Disney storytelling was like at the time. More importantly, it helped pave the way for all of those films in its technical achievements. How so exactly? Let's find out. In the 1930s, the Silly Symphony cartoons were at their peak. Groundbreaking cartoon after groundbreaking cartoon. Flowers and Trees, Three Little Pigs, The Tortoise and the Hare, all of them came from the 1930s. It not only continued to solidify the Disney brand as being one of high quality in the eyes of the public, but it even gave them some respect within the rest of the film industry. They were critically acclaimed. They won all the Oscars. Now, one might wonder why they were working so hard to step up their game. Well, there was something big coming down the pipeline: Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The studio wanted to put everything they learned over the past decade to the test with an animated feature. However, there's a big difference in expectations between a short-form cartoon and a feature-length film. It needed to be grand and cinematic. It needed to feel the same as a live-action film. So, they had to figure out how to do that themselves. One way to make it feel that way? Depth. And I'm speaking about depth in the most literal sense of the word. When you zoom in on a drawing, it doesn't have the same effect as when you do it in the real world. It makes the scene seem flat, and you can't have that and be cinematic at the same time. Which brings us to this short's landmark achievement, the multiplane camera. Basically, different parts of the scene are drawn on different layers of celluloid. Think like layers in a drawing program. The cells were layered with a camera over top them, and as the scenes were filmed, different layers moved up and down, giving the illusion of perspective. So they looked like the way they would in real life. The Disney team were not the first people to figure this out. Ub Iwerks did some experimenting with it in his own cartoons, but they were the ones to really perfect it. If this was more than just a technique to get the film done, it was a selling point of the cartoon. You look back at old newspaper articles from the time, and a lot of the press was about the multiplane camera. It was hardly a new thing to promote a film based on the technology behind it, and to this day it still isn't unheard of. The Old Mill was just another example of it. Not to mention, it was released only a few months before Snow White premiered, so it also served as a preview of what that movie was going to look like.
Before going into the production of our first feature-length cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, we produced an experimental short subject, incorporating many of the problems that we expected to encounter in the making of Snow White.
The Old Mill premiered in 1937 to critical acclaim. Herman J. Burnfield of the Cincinnati Enquirer wrote, "A silly symphony, The Old Mill, is imaginative and has a welcome place on the program." A critic for the Ottawa Citizen wrote, "This is hardly a silly symphony, more perhaps a pastoral symphony with the blessed additions of subtle touches of humor." And Clark Wales of the Democrat and Chronicle wrote, "The effect is that of a fine painting, and many scenes in the Old Mill are as beautiful as the old Dutch masters." The film took home the Academy Award for Best Animated Short in 1937, was listed at number 14 on the 50 Greatest Cartoons of All Time list, and was preserved in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry in 2015. It was also the basis for an attraction at Disneyland Paris. I don't know why either. The Old Mill doesn't have a story in its traditional sense. It's more a series of vignettes, centered on, well, the titular Old Mill. It's old and abandoned, having not been used for many years. So nature has moved back in and reclaimed it. All different kinds of animals inhabit it now, from a family of bluebirds to a mischief of mice. And the cartoon just shows us what a night by the Old Mill is like. A unique aspect of this cartoon is how realistic it is. Sure, there are some cartoony moments. You get a little scene of the frogs hanging out and stuff like that. But for the most part, the cartoon is very grounded in reality, which was rare for Disney even back then. None of the animals talk, they all act like real animals. You'd think that'd make the cartoon dull or uninteresting, but no. It finds the whimsy and fantasy in everyday things. Cartoons are usually about exaggerating reality, but sometimes sticking closely to it can work wonders.
We attempted to give it the quality of a feature, taking special care with details such as water reflections, wind, rain, and lightning. Many pencil drawings were made in order to obtain realistic and lifelike animation of the effects we needed.
About halfway through the cartoon, a bad storm hits, and the mill, which is already in disrepair, falls further into decay, which is bad news for the poor animals living inside of it. For such a simple idea, it's quite thrilling. The way the music changes, seeing the mill crumble in real time, all of the animals' various reactions to it, it all comes together to make an exciting climax, easily on par with the feature films of the time. Another big element for what made the cartoon work was the music. The score was composed by Lee Harline, who would go on to write the music for Snow White and Pinocchio. The music for the Old Mill is a mix. There's a traditional grand and moving Disney-esque score, but it's supported by diegetic sounds from the environment. The reeds seeming to sing, the cattails bumping up against the fence like bells. Disney had great Foley artists who created amazing sound effects that are still used today. And when combined with the score, it heightens the atmosphere and the emotions the audience is feeling. The short is typically discussed in relation to Snow White for obvious reasons. A lot of the lessons they learned from making this cartoon helped in making that final film. But if I compare this to any Disney film, it'd be Fantasia, specifically the Nutcracker Suite segment. That segment also didn't have a traditional story, and was more a series of vignettes. And while it's more fantastical than the Old Mill, it also found the beauty and fantasy in everyday things, like the simple changing of the seasons. And they both told their stories through music, without a single line of dialogue. That also makes it unique among the rest of the Silly Symphonies. Even though music was the focus, you usually heard dialogue in most of the cartoons, whether they be spoken or sung. In the Old Mill, there isn't a single word said. It all relies on pantomime from characters and the atmosphere. That's a way that older Disney movies are different from the current ones. There's a bigger emphasis on atmosphere and the feeling of a scene, as opposed to any complex stories or characters. And the Old Mill is quite possibly the pinnacle of that style of storytelling. A lot of the later films of that era owe a lot to it for laying the foundation. Think of the forest scene from Snow White, the prelude to the Headless Horseman from Ichabod and Mr. Toad, the entirety of Bambi. It's all predicated on what the Old Mill did in 1937. Ichabod and Mr. Toad especially, it borrows a lot of the same visual gags. The cattails hitting against the wood, the sound the frogs make, the singing reeds. I wouldn't be shocked if the filmmakers remembered their work on the Old Mill when creating that scene. The Old Mill is timeless. You can show it to anyone nowadays and they'll be entertained by it. And with no dialogue, it's something that can be enjoyed regardless of what language they might speak. It's unfortunate that the groundbreaking technology behind it overshadowed the film as a whole. But if you're a fan of the golden age of Disney, this is an absolute must-watch. It goes to show that films can say so much without saying a single word. Have you seen this cartoon? Which one should we cover next? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.